Hey everyone, welcome back to the Primal Pioneer. Just a few things before I dive into the episode. One, I hope you enjoyed last week's podcast where I collaborated with my wife and we did a pretty honest and raw and real talk about what a healthy relationship looks like. I'm just gonna, before I go any further, I'm just going to say, we've been together for, well, going on 12 years now. And so we do not claim to have a perfect relationship by any means, but we've done a lot of work on our relationship over the years. And my wife's a therapist, and we've done a lot of emotional work and healing on our relationship, and actually that's a very much an ongoing process. So we talked a little bit about that in the last podcast, and we also talked about the importance of fighting in relationship. And of course, I'm not talking about anybody getting harmed or anything like that, but if you're curious about this, if you're wanting to be in a relationship, if you're already in a partnership or a couple, or a marriage, or whatever it may be, I would encourage you to take a listen to that episode if you're wanting some more support or insight around your relationship. My wife specializes in couples therapy and relationships and so forth, and we personally have an amazing couples therapist as well that's really helped us over the years. And just like our health, our physical health, and even our mental, emotional health, our relationship health also needs a lot of attention, deserves a lot of work. It's a work in progress, and it needs TLC. And this is, and I know especially people who listen to my podcast, and I know me personally, until I met Jen, it was like, oh, focus on my physical health, maybe a little bit of my mental, emotional health as well. Relationships, it's just like, it's just a thing. It's just kind of, we'll see how it goes. We'll see what comes, it's not like, oh, that we'll work on this and it's something that needs to be tended to. That was never personally my mindset. And I know a lot of people who are in the healing world tend to focus a lot on their physical body healing, and the relationship aspect of healing often gets no attention, very little attention. So I really hope that discussion that we had last week was inspiring and insightful for you with regard to your own personal relationships. And Jen's actually going to be starting her own podcast on couples and relationships, and I'll be doing that podcast with her very often as well. So stay tuned if you resonated with, I hate that word, if you enjoyed that podcast, if it felt helpful for you and your couple, or in your search for a partner. So of course, sure, mitochondrial health, nutrition, sunlight, homeopathy. Okay, these are all spot on. We need these things for our health. These are very important parts of health, right? And I talk about them all the time. They're main players when it comes to our health, no doubt. But so are our relationships. Okay. And the last thing I'll say about that is we're meant to be in relationship. However, just like we have been mirrored by our parents, right? We've the examples we've got from our parents with regard to food and nutrition and taking care of our bodies, for the most part, for most people, is like, oh my God, total shit, eating shit growing up, getting vaccinated, relying on antibiotics, etc. Right? Most people, that's been their experience. And it's been like, hey, that's a really poor example of how to take care of our bodies and health. Similarly, we've had the same really poor examples with regard to relationships and how being in relationship is reflected to us in our parents and our family and our surrounding environment growing up, has also healthy, solid examples of that are severely lacking, in our world. There's not good examples of that as well. So I hope that episode was beneficial to you. And if you haven't tuned into that yet, I encourage you to do so. Okay, that was a long introduction to get into today. I am bringing back a food talk episode. I know I've done one before so far, and many people were like, hey, do more food talk episodes. And I love food. My wife calls me a chef. I don't know. I love cooking. I love cooking for people. We are actually in the midst of developing an outdoor kitchen here on our farm, so people can come in and enjoy truly farm to table experience in literally the kitchen's going to be in the middle of our garden and outside in nature. So I'm super stoked about that. And to have that available. Probably it'll be about a year until that's up and ready, but we're in the process, and I'm really excited about that. Today I'm going to talk about tomatoes, greenhouses, and fruit. May sound like a weird and interesting combination of things, but actually they fit together really well, and I'm going to get into that. So I know a lot of you tune into the podcast here know that I'm into mitochondrial health and sunlight, homeopathy, and so forth. And you may think that as someone who is into mitochondrial health and alternative healing, that I'd jump, really beyond the avoid fruit, avoid nightshades bandwagon that many people in the mitochondrial world emphasize and practice. And whatever you believe in and practice, that's amazing, and I highly support whatever anybody wants to do. I'm all about freedom all across the board, and today's the 4th of July, so hey, here's to freedom for everyone, right? But I have a hard time with trends and with just going along with something because, hey, this person said it was a good idea. And I'll talk about that as well throughout the episode. So I know last episode I talked a lot about trends as well, and how I really despise a trend. I'm not into it. All the trends that are going on now. I always botch this word, and my wife's always like, no, it's this, and I never remember. But shibari, what else? Pronouns, polyamory, goddess stuff, trending now. And I want to run in the complete opposite direction because usually these are just, there's not real roots or substance in these things. Some of them maybe have good ideas, right? Like I'll talk about here with some of the mitochondrial stuff behind tomatoes and greenhouses and fruit and so forth. But I caution people around a trend. Be careful to dive headfirst into a trend. It's usually not all roses. It's not all a bed of roses that that they set the table as that. It's like, oh, this is the best thing ever, and this and that, and it's just typically not like that. But trend or not, tomatoes, other nightshades, and fruit can play a very nutrient-rich, important role in our diets. And of course, there are many things that we have to be aware of before simply eating more tomatoes or fruit. And I'm going to talk all about that today, including how to use a greenhouse in the most effective way. As somebody who is now, I guess you'd consider, I guess I can give myself the title of farmer now, right? Because I've done we're not even a year into our farm, right? We're not even a year into our farmstead here, and we've done some things we weren't expecting to do quite yet on our farm, or maybe we didn't think about it. People think of a farm, oh, have some chickens and grow some vegetables. Sure, yeah, and of course that can be a farm, but I feel like we've earned the title of farmer pretty early on because of some of the obstacles we've had to go through with regard to our farm, and mainly around our animals. We couldn't, I know I've mentioned this, but we couldn't find anyone to butcher our chickens, and we called around and all over the state, in Colorado and New Mexico, and no, I don't do that, or nobody would answer, or the line was disconnected, and it was just like, we're coming up short all around. We butchered all 40 of our meat chickens. Weren't expecting to do that, was expecting someone to go, hey, will you come do this for me, and blah, you know, boop, 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 it's over, and I'm not involved in the process, and that's it. We were very involved in the process, so that was a very potent initiation into becoming a farmer. And just yesterday, we castrated our pigs, so that was an interesting experience as well. So those two things may seem like not a big deal, but they were a very huge deal to be very much hands-on and spearheading that process on our farm here. So anyway, I'm going to talk about greenhouses today, because this is going to be part of the discussion, because greenhouses are becoming very popular. People are using them a lot more. I understand why. I understand the reasoning behind it. I understand that it prolongs the growing season, so to speak. It allows you to grow food in seasons that you couldn't grow food in before. And so we have to take into consideration some of the downfalls with regard to our health and nutrient quality of the food when doing so. And so I'm going to talk about that as well. So before I dive into the episode, I just have a couple of announcemements. And one is that I'm now enrolling students for my classical homeopathic practitioner training course or program. And if you're inspired by what you hear on this podcast with regard to homeopathy, with regard to my approach to healing, and if you're looking for a solid, in-depth program that teaches you how to actually be a classically trained homeopath, this program could be a really good fit for you. So the program is 1.5 years long, and the next enrollment, the next program starts September 2023. So only wow, like, man, a couple months away. And so you can learn more about the program by going to my site, heatharshepard.com/homeopathy. You'll see the practitioner training tab, and you can read more about it there. You can apply there. You can go over to my contact page and be like, hey, I'm super intrigued by this program and want to participate. Go to my contact page, and I'll set up a free call with you just to discuss details with regard to the program to see if it's a good fit. You literally need zero knowledge about homeopathy to join me in this program. In fact, I mean, now, you know, of course, if you have a lot of knowledge, fine, still, and you're interested in the program, great. But honestly, the less you know about homeopathy, the better, because we're starting with a clean slate. And so don't let that deter you from reaching out and asking about the program and inquiring about the program, and don't let that deter you from engaging in the course together. So the other thing I want to mention is I took a long slumber from my YouTube channel and have recently been inspired to start posting there again. You'll find this podcast on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. I literally think it's just my YouTube channel is just / my name, Heathar Shepard, HeatharShepard. Okay. And last week I posted a video there all about the sulfur type in homeopathy, and gave a brief introduction to classical homeopathy in that video as well. So you can go to my channel to check out that video. And there's going to be many more videos to come, as well as my Primal Pioneer podcast episodes. You, from now on, should be able to find most of the episodes there as well. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. I actually want to start with tomatoes. Honestly, tomatoes are one of my favorite food groups. I'm not gonna lie. Maybe it's because I'm Sicilian, but you know, whatever the reason may be, I love tomatoes. I love everything tomato. You name it, I'm all in. Here's the thing. Okay, let's talk about tomatoes, and we're gonna do a deep dive here. The tomatoes sold in the grocery store are absolute shit. Okay, I'm just gonna be flat out honest. You know, I'm honest all the time with you all anyway. Don't hold back. I can't hold back. It's not in my blood, it's not in my genes. But the tomatoes sold in our grocery stores today are total horseshit. They taste like nothing, and they're mealy, and they're just bland and tasteless and really actually disgusting. I try to never buy a tomato in the store. Of course, once in a while I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna try again. Like, you know, maybe things have changed. Nope, same old tasteless tomato after tomato from the grocery store. Here's the thing. We have to talk about why are they tasteless? And if you've never had a real tomato, quote unquote, a real tomato, like grown from an actual garden outside in sunlight, you may not know the difference, especially if you're of a younger generation. Because, well, I'll talk about the because here in a minute. But the tomatoes in your grocery store are tasteless. Okay, here's why. For one, let me just start by saying a lot, maybe even most produce in general sold in the store today is fucking tasteless. A lot of grocery store produce tasteless. Okay. And when fruits and veggies are tasteless, this is a key sign that they haven't been grown in nourishing soil. The soil they have been grown in is lacking in nutrients. That is the number one red flag there for a tasteless tomato. When the tomato or any produce, okay, let's just say any produce as well. When produce is tasteless, the soil it's grown in is deficient, lacking in nutrients, and therefore the produce is lacking in nutrients. And when the produce is lacking in nutrients, it lacks flavor, period. Okay? So you're not just eating a tasteless tomato, you're eating a nutrient deficient tomato. This is where the health issues can come into play as well, because our food is lacking nutrients. Here's another reason why tomatoes are tasteless from the grocery store. Because most tomatoes are grown under fake fucking lights. I'm not kidding, okay? People are too lazy or care too much about quote unquote feeding the world or making a dollar that they grow their produce under LED grow lights. Okay. Do you know? I'm sure all of you who've been listening to this podcast, and unless you're living under a rock, that you know what you've heard about the health concerns around artificial light and LED lights, right? We know that it depletes melatonin levels and that it's pro-inflammatory and that it messes up our metabolism and it screws up our hormones and that it screws up our sleep cycles and it doesn't allow us to heal at night when we're exposed to LED light and fake light, right? We know this. Most people have some sort of awareness of this, or they've heard of it somewhere. But let's talk about, because this part isn't talked about, grow lights, LED grow lights. Okay. LED grow lights are basically this massive source of artificial light, much of it blue light, that is very intense. and it's blasted on vegetables and so forth, and tomatoes that are grown in a greenhouse in order to expedite their growth. Do you know what an LED grow light is? An LED grow light is like blue light on steroids. So that light is how your tasteless tomatoes are grown. It's how a lot of our produce that's sold in the grocery stores are actually grown today as well. So tasteless tomatoes and other tasteless produce equals not only deficient, nutrient deficient soil, but it also equals fake light food production in many cases. So this is yet another reason to focus on buying your food from local farmers and farmers markets and growing your own, okay? It's worth the investment. They continue to manipulate our food. It's worth growing your own food. It's worth starting to grow your own food. Not under LED grow lights, however. Personally, okay, hang on, I'll hold that thought for a minute. Okay, but let me just say that just because you buy your tomatoes from a local farmer doesn't actually mean they didn't grow their shit under fake light, under grow lights. You have to ask them, how did you start these tomatoes? And you know, be charismatic and go out on a limb. Your tomatoes look so delicious. How did you get them to be so big? Did you use grow lights to you know, ask them, you know, and don't act like you have a problem with LED grow lights, because then they'll, you know, of course they want you to buy their fucking product. So you have to pretend that, hey, you're curious about how they grew their tomato, because you are. And you also have to get the truth. You have to try to get a true, honest answer from somebody, because this is the food that you're buying to put into your body. So it's important to have, that's your right, to have knowledge about that. Let's say you forget to ask somebody, you're in a hurry, you don't think of it, you don't want to, you're too shy, whatever the reason may be. You get the tomato, you bring it home, you're like, I can't tell. I'm not sure if this is grown under. You will be able to tell in the taste of the tomato. Full, rich flavor? No, there's not going to be LED grow lights. If it's tasteless, then we're going to have to question some things. Okay, either the soil was really deficient and or it was grown under LED grow lights. The taste doesn't lie. The taste is going to be, you know, the test. The proof is in the pudding, you know. So now, as someone who loves tomatoes, I have to grow my own. Most of our garden is tomatoes. I'm not lying. I love tomatoes. Most of our garden is tomatoes, many different varieties. Each year I plan to have more varieties, because I want to make salsas, and I want to make sun-dried tomatoes, and I want to make sauces, and I want to can tomatoes for the winter months. I'll talk about that in a minute. But, you know, as someone who loves tomatoes, I grow my own or buy from legit farmers. So growing your food under grow lights doesn't make you a farmer. Sorry, I'm sorry if that was hurtful, but people who, we can say the same thing, people who have these mass production GMO farms with just like, you know, acres and acres and sometimes hundreds of acres of soy and corn. I'm sorry, that's not farming. It's not farming. So you've got to get your food, grow your food outside in the dirt, in the soil, under sunlight. That's how we grow healthy food. And you have to tend to your soil. Much of the soil today is nutrient deficient. Today, on our farm, we literally stockpile everybody's shit around the property. So I'm not kidding. So we take our chickens and we compost their manure so we can use it in our garden. We take the manure from our pigs. We put it in a huge hole. We let it compost. We put it on our garden. We have an incinerating toilet on the property. So humans take a dump in the incinerating toilet, incinerating it, literally burns it, turns it into ash. We put it on our compost. Okay. This is truly rural hygiene. Okay. This is rural hygiene. And so, everything can have a purpose. The only thing that really goes to waste is plastic, and that's a whole other topic. But you've got to get your food outside in the dirt, in the soil, grown under sunlight. This changes the nutrient profile. This changes and influences the deuterium content in that food. It changes the flavor. All right, let's do a side note about deuterium, because people today are obsessed with deuterium in food and water. Jack Kruse has scared everyone half to death about deuterium. Sure, yes, it can be an issue, 100%. It can trigger an inflammatory response when you eat heaps of oranges or bananas when the UVB light isn't present in your area. We know this. The horse is dead around this topic for most people in the mitochondrial world. But guess what isn't talked about in the mitochondrial world? Greenhouses and grow lights, and how these drive levels of deuterium, and how they totally devoid the plant of any possible nutrients that, could be in those plants. When it comes to greenhouses, okay, I'll give you an example of how we use greenhouses on our property. Currently we have one, and we hope to have a very large one next year. I want to talk about how we can use a greenhouse to our advantage, okay? And when it meets its tipping point and it's no longer advantageous to us, it actually is a detriment. So when it comes to greenhouses, they're an amazing resource to start your veggie starts in during the end of winter, during the beginning of spring, while you wait for the last frost to get the F out, right? That it's an amazing resource to have to start your starts. Okay. And for us, we don't use LED grow lights, but during the daytime, we will put in a red light to our in our plant room, in our greenhouse, and it works amazingly. And the plants don't grow in this, like, it's like a plant on antibiotics when you put LED grow lights on it. And you can taste the difference in the food grown under an LED grow light, or when it's started in a greenhouse under natural light or under a red light. It's a huge difference in flavor and nutrition profile and so forth. But here's the thing, they don't stay in there the whole time. They're in the greenhouse, not under an LED grow light. Okay. They're in the greenhouse, and I recommend putting a red light in there, honestly, because we know that plastic, and if your greenhouse is glass or whatever it may be, blocks a lot of the red light. Put the red light in there. It needs that. Okay. So, but when the last frost hits, the plants need to go out. They need to be transitioned out. They can't stay in the LED grow light for a long period of time or forever. They can't stay in the greenhouse period for a long period of time. The LED grow light just needs to go away in all. So this is a proper non-health threatening way to utilize a greenhouse. But to grow a plant under an LED grow light at all, to grow a plant for its entire life cycle under LED grow lights, which a lot of the produce in the grocery stores do, this is not good. This has consequences. There are less nutrients. There are higher deuterium levels. There's no freaking flavor. This is what's not talked about in the mitochondrial world. It's just like banana bad in winter, orange bad in winter. Wait, deuterium in them scares everybody half to death, and now nobody eats them ever. But we have to talk about actually why are the deuterium levels higher in some of our fruits and vegetables today than they have ever been, and it's because we're growing our food in an artificially lit environment. And our soil is really deficient. Add those two in, you're going to get a tomato that tastes like literally nothing. So if you're concerned with deuterium levels, make sure your food isn't grown in a greenhouse under LED grow lights, and make sure it spends the majority of its lifespan outside under sunlight in healthy soil. People don't want to do the work to grow their food like that. It's easier to put your vegetables and seedlings under an LED grow light and say, forget about it. Freaking easy. Absolutely. You know, when you get them outside in sunlight in the earth, then you have to think about rodents, then you have to think about weather, then you have to think about pests, then you have to take in nature into consideration. We're removing nature from our food also. And so what happens is foods become more pro-inflammatory. And we say, oh, it's the deuterium. Oh, it's the histamine response. It's the way the food is grown. And it's also the environment that you put your body in as well. So both of these things are going to impact how that food acts in your body. This is a really good segue into fruit. So another deuterium bomb in the mitochondrial world. But I'm going to be honest with you. Do I eat fruit in winter? No, I'm not going to eat fresh fruit in winter. But I do eat a little bit of dried fruit in the winter. I do. Dried fruit has had the water literally dehydrated out of it, making deuterium levels, you know, pretty negligible, pretty low. As a farmer and someone who spends heaps of time outside in very strong sunlight in the summer months, I spend a lot of time outside all season. Sometime in the winter where I live, it's brutal to be out there, but you know, I have to get wood, I have to, you know, chop kindling, I have to shovel things. I'm outside, and sometimes it's a super sunny day, and the altitude that I live at is very strong UV light even in the winter time as well. So I do spend a lot of my time outside all season throughout the entire year. So as someone who spends, you know, a lot of time outside in very strong sunlight, and especially in the summer months when the sunlight is super strong, fruit has been a lifesaver for me. It's literally been a lifeline, because the heat plus sweating when I'm out there and working hard in the heat and in the sun depletes electrolytes and water soluble nutrients from the body. It can also deplete fat soluble nutrients from the body. There's not a day that goes by that I don't eat meat or fat. It's like that's a steady part of my life. But every day in the summer, I also drink either fresh squeezed orange juice or fresh squeezed grapefruit juice, not shit in the store that comes in a jar, fresh squeezed, or, you know, organic watermelon or something very juicy to help naturally replenish my electrolyte levels. I just recently shared in my Patreon, on my Patreon site, which is patreon.com/sunlightrx, I believe. My issues with electrolytes in a bottle, my issues with salt, adding salt to our water, and salt being added to electrolytes, and then we eat those things, and I have some concerns around that. So what do I do to naturally replenish my electrolyte levels in the summer when it's really needed? Is a fresh squeezed orange juice or grapefruit juice or watermelon. It gives me more energy and minerals to stay strong and steady outside in the summer heat. If I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to work in that environment. I would feel too depleted. And at the end of the day, have like a ribeye or steak or some sort of meat or fish or whatnot. And that, that's important too. But I'm mentioning this because we've been taught to avoid this food group, fruit, especially in the mitochondrial world. Plus, the strong UVB light in summer naturally depletes inflammatory molecules, such as excess deuterium from the body, making it a perfect time to eat fruit. It grows in the summer for a reason, right? This is nature's way. So, I've mentioned deuterium. I haven't mentioned deuterium in ages, but today I've mentioned deuterium quite a bit. And I want to also mention that we actually need some deuterium and it's not all bad. So people go to great lengths to avoid deuterium today. Of course, our modern diets and lifestyles, and the way our food production operates, it contributes to this very top heavy deuterium level, situation that we're dealing with in our food. But if you eat seasonally, as I lay out in the sunlight diet, and if you practice your sunlight RX, and if you really make a point to avoid food grown under LED grow lights, and hey, if somebody grows their food under LED grow lights and it's a farmer, say, hey, I'm really concerned about that. Tell them your concerns, because, if you don't buy it because of that reason, maybe they'll start to change their game plan if more and more people voice this concern. So, but if you eat seasonally, if you practice your sunlight RX, if you know how to create a healthy light environment, there is literally no need to be concerned or, as most people are in the mito world, obsessed with deuterium. While we're on the topic, I caution people when it comes to buying things with fancy claims that are a shit ton of money, like deuterium depleted water. Some of these products literally cost more than my mortgage, and it's not worth the money. And who knows if the claims are even accurate, especially with regard to deuterium depleted water. If you want an affordable, true source of deuterium depleted water, drink real spring water. Keyword is real. Okay, period. Not in a plastic bottle, obviously. Okay. To wrap up the show today, I'm going to circle back to tomatoes. And my mom's Sicilian. I can honestly say there wasn't a day growing up, okay, maybe there was a day here or there, but really most days we had tomatoes. Literally what we ate, something had tomatoes in it. There was some sort of tomatoes. There were bolognese sauce. There was marinara sauce. There were meatballs and sauce. There were stuffed shells with sauce. There was raviolis with sauce. There was homemade pizza with sauce. My mom learned how to make homemade pizza sauce from her Aunt Rita. Side note, okay, obviously, but this shit was so good. She used fresh Roma tomatoes that she grew in her backyard in their tiny little garden. She steamed the tomatoes and then literally used her hands and crushed them over the pizza with herbs. And I can remember going over to Aunt Rita's house as a kid, and she would bust out her homemade pizza and sauce for us in her tiny little, duplex in Rochester, New York. It legit smelled like little Italy in there. And it was the best pizza I've ever had. It was so good. So long story short, tomatoes and sauce are in my blood. They're in my genetic code. If I ran a DNA test, it would come up as, tomatoes. So I know I've mentioned nightshades before, but I want to speak to you here again briefly because, especially if there's any new listeners out there. Nightshades are grown in strong UVB light. You cannot grow a nightshade without UVB light. You cannot do it. It needs that strong light in order to grow. Eggplant, peppers, tomatoes. So when our ancestors consumed these foods, they literally could only grow them in the summertime and, early fall. That's when they were harvested, right? That's when they were available. That's it. Blank, point blank, period. Today, of course, grocery stores, and when we go in there, we can get a tomato any time of year, but it doesn't mean we should be eating them. I know a lot of you have heard this, but if there's any new listeners, I just want to mention this. Now, I said I'd mention this earlier in the podcast. When you add canning and fermenting and pickling to your kitchen repertoire, you can make some of these summer foods that, can have higher deuterium levels and if we consume them in that fresh state in the wintertime, yes, they possibly could contribute to inflammation. I'm going to tell you, if you've been vaccinated or had antibiotics or are on prescription medications and you avoid deuterium foods, like a banana in winter is shit compared to antibiotics, vaccines, other suppressive therapies, topical steroids, oral steroids. The deuterium levels in those things and the side effects they have in your body for a very long time pale in comparison to eating a fucking banana in January. Let's get real with what's really happening here with our health and with our food. Sure, okay, it's not a brilliant idea to have heaps of bananas in the winter if you don't live in a tropical area, or fresh, nightshade vegetables, right? Sure, they're going to have a little bit more of an inflammatory effect on your body. But the vaccines you put in your body, the antibiotics you put in your body, the prescription medications you put in your body, you damn well better not be worried about a banana in January if those are your practices and medical go-tos. That was, I know, maybe like a Mars on the ascendant type of energy coming at you there. For those of you who don't know what that is, just know it may have been a very intense, energy, but I'm someone who wants to be honest. And the shit we're told about deuterium in a freaking vegetable or fruit, sure, yeah, we can be concerned about that to some extent. But people get obsessed with it. And then they get into cult-like practices around their diet. And then, the person of this cult leader, what does he say? You have to focus on the shit that matters and stop focusing on things that don't matter. Well, not that deuterium in a banana in winter doesn't matter, but if we're going to kind of weigh what really matters here, and I talk about suppressive therapies all the time on this podcast because it's an area that needs much more light shined in its direction. What you put in your body with regard to jabs, antibiotics, prescription medications has much more significant impact on your inflammation levels, on your ability to detox, on your mitochondrial health, on the deuterium levels in your body than any freaking banana will ever have, or tomato. Okay, so back to, I know I go on tangents, and my wife called me out on the last podcast about this, but I always go back to what my original thought was. At least I try to. So when you add canning and fermenting and pickling to your kitchen repertoire, you can make some of these summer foods like tomatoes, like other nightshades, adequate for consumption in winter. There are ways to preserve the food while reducing excess deuterium levels in the food that sunlight naturally depletes for us in the summer, right? There are ways to work with this. So I hope that was helpful and maybe enlightening in new ways around your diet, around mitochondrial health, around what's really influencing our inflammation levels. And I will end on this. Just because I drink fresh, organic fruit juice in the summer and stockpile tomatoes and eat tomatoes and have trying to grow tomatoes in every nook and cranny on our farm, doesn't mean this is going to be the best thing for you. I love how other people try to say what's best for somebody. That's ludicrous. If you listen to this podcast and you're like, yeah, I love tomatoes and nightshades and fruit, but I've been avoiding them because of what somebody said or what somebody's told me, or because a genetic test told me that it was pro-inflammatory and that I have an allergy to it or a sensitivity. But none of this is based on any personal experience. I always encourage people to find out for themselves. Be your own boss. Be your own inner authority. See you next week.